So we've pored over the details for months, interviewed the chief engineer and had sleepless nights about PDK gearboxes and electric power steering. And now we're finally going to drive the new Porsche 991 GT3. Our very first taste of it is at an empty race circuit. Well, you just would, wouldn't you? So the reason we've come to a racetrack is because this GT3, on paper at least, seems to be all about lap times and raw speed. We all know they've ditched the 6-speed manual gearbox in favour of a 7-speed PDK and adopted rear-wheel steering. We also know that Porsche claim this GT3 is quicker around the ring than a 4-litre RS, which just seems nuts to me. But I guess what we're concerned about is what might have been lost along the way. Character, involvement, for want of a better word, feel. Now that might sound like airy-fairy crap to some people, but generations of 911s have been defined by their weight distribution, their fantastic steering, and the challenge they present to the driver. That's why we love these things. Of course, on track, some of that raw detail is less important. Here at Blyton Park, in this GT3 pre-production prototype, it's going to be all about response, grip, traction, and that new 3.8 litre direct injection engine, which has 475 horsepower, revs to 9,000 RPM. This PDK box as well punches in gear shifts in 100 milliseconds. Suffice to say, this thing should be absolutely mega around here. Okay, so the wake for the Metzger engine has been going on for some time for 911 geeks like me. Within about 100 yards of driving this thing, any fears about the lack of motorsport pedigree of this engine, of it feeling a bit too ordinary, they just disappear. The way this thing revs, the noise and the power at the top end are just unbelievably addictive. Okay, it doesn't have that lovely low-speed chunter and rattle of the old Metzger. It doesn't have the torque of the 4-litre RS, although it's still pretty torquey. But you won't miss that engine, I promise you. And this PDK box is just transformed from other Porsches. It's just quicker, punchier. It just works so much better. Is it as good as the Ferrari system, which is really the benchmark? I think it definitely is, you know. Do you miss the 6-speed manual gearbox? On a circuit, I'm afraid to say, not as much as you think. The PDK just makes the performance so accessible, and there's so much of it. Even more impressive than any of that stuff, if that's even possible, is the balance of this thing. The 997 GT3 and RS had mega front ends and fantastic stability, but this thing just takes it up another level again. You basically never have to worry about the rear engine weight distribution at all. Such is the grip on turning, but you still get the advantage on the way out of corners. Listen to this thing. It is really, really special. The precision and the mechanical grip, just brilliant. And I guess part of that must be down to the rear wheel steering. I have to say, you never feel it work. This car just feels super, super agile. I think we can safely say on track, the new GT3 is just brilliant. Okay, so the GT3 is fast, the engine and box are incredible, the chassis is so well sorted and so well balanced. But we need some context. How fast is fast? With the help of a McLaren 12C, which has almost redefined our understanding of the word, we're going to find out. Now the 12C is getting on for twice the price of the GT3. So strictly speaking, it's not really a rival at all. But if you want to judge something's pure speed on a circuit, this is the benchmark supercar. It is unbelievably fast around here. There's so much power. And with the handling mode in track, it's so stiff, as you can see, the way the front's bouncing around. It feels like a proper little race car. If the GT3 gets anywhere near this thing, it will be utterly, utterly amazing. When we put on the timing gear, the 12C got around Blyton in 102.7, peaking at 151.7 miles an hour along the back straight. For reference, a Pagani Huayra does a 102.5 around here. The GT3 is nothing like as fast on the straight, peaking at 144.6 miles an hour, but it's better under braking and simply brilliant through fast transitions. Incredibly, it knocks a tenth from the 12C's time with a 102.6.
Well, I have to say I am utterly staggered that the GT3 has just gone quicker than the 12C. Okay, probably running stickier tyres, it's got the Sport Max race tyres or whatever they're called, but it's 140 horsepower down and it weighs exactly the same. It's not as quick as the McLaren on the straight, no question about that, but in terms of turning, braking and traction, it actually murders the 12C. I think, on track at least, my 991 cynicism has been swept aside. From here, the big question to me is, has all this grip, all this control, all this dialing out of the rear engine feel actually detracted from this car in terms of a road car, how it feels on the road? Well, fortunately, we know a pretty epic road round here. We're going to go there right now, just see what this GT3 is all about on the road.
Yep, this place should do it. Now all we need is a car to take on the GT3.
So we've got the road, and in the Nissan GT-R we unquestionably have the car to test the GT3. Okay, so it's a love it or hate it machine, but that's really on a point of principle rather than the reality of driving this car. Detractors might say it's dull, a sort of computer game on wheels, but that could not be further from the truth. The GT-R clonks and bangs and whirs and sounds more like a piece of heavy industry than a computer game to me. And yet it's obscenely fast across the ground. But it still takes technique to get the best from, because it's relatively heavy and it's so powerful. So most of the time it just feels like a socking brake rear-wheel drive car. After all these years, it is still a fantastic driver's car. Will the new GT3 be quicker than the GT-R across the ground? Well, I struggle to believe it will, but that's not really the point. What we want to know is whether the PDK box is finally as good as the brilliant dual clutcher in this, and also whether the GT3's character has changed. What with PDK, rear wheel steer, all that grip and stability that we discovered on the track, has that brought it closer to the GT-R? Has it in fact become the computer game that Porsche purists have been saying this car is for years and years? We're going to find out on these mega roads. So it's fair to say the GT3 absolutely blew me away on track. So good and so fast and so adjustable. But how does it cope on the road and in the context of that Nissan GT-R? Well, the first thing that strikes you is just how easy it is to drive. The ride's really good. There's a tiny bit of tramlining through the steering to remind you in a GT3. The gearbox is obviously incredibly smooth and it's great in auto mode. So the GT3 feels civilised and just really refined after the GT-R. You could live with this car every day, no problem at all. That's all very well, but what's the GT3 like when you start to wind it up a little bit? Well, of course it feels lighter and lower than the GT-R, of course it does. In fact, it changes direction so positively with that rear wheel steer system and the active diff. It feels so agile. The 991 is bigger than previous GT3s, but it feels genuinely like a small car. It is amazing the speed it carries into corners, so agile. But what about this new 3.8 DFI engine? Well, it doesn't quite have the character of the Metzger in the mid-range. It doesn't have all those lovely noises. It doesn't quite have the torque of that old engine either. Certainly in the 4-litre RS, which I guess is a slightly unfair comparison. But the top end, so addictive. It just rips down to 9,000. Listen to it at the top. And of course the PDK box gives you really easy access to that all the time. So I'd say you travel a lot quicker in this car. The one really controversial area of the 991 for me is the steering feel. The electric steering is just plain not as good as in the 997. But the motorsport guys have given this thing some steering feel. The accuracy is incredible, partly due to the rear wheel steer again, but it's got genuine feel. In fact, the whole car just sort of courses with information for you, and you can always feel its balance shifting around. So in terms of throttle response, agility, balance and adjustability as well, I think this GT3 does take care of the GTR. Still love the GTR, it's such a monstrous car, but this feels more special. What about in the context of the great GT3s of the past and the RSs as well, which is hard not to reference? Well, I think the engine, for all its top-end fireworks, it's so cool at the top end, it's lost a teeny bit of that character in the mid-range of the Metzger, a little bit of the torque, the noises, and the sort of raw connection that you used to get with that engine. The same could be said of the steering as well. It's so quick, so accurate, and it's much more feel than in other 991s. Just a tiny bit lost compared to a 997. What about the gearbox? Well, this PDK is transformed. It's really, really good. Do I miss the manual? Yeah, I do. A little bit, I'm afraid, on the road. Not so much on the track. But that sense of connection, the physical exertion that you needed with the manual gearbox, I miss it just a bit. But in every other way, this GT3 is just a triumph. They've nailed it. It's such a sweet car. Most of all, GT3 still feels like a GT3, and that makes me a very happy boy.